Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. Most of us possess an inner feeling that the world should be just. This may come from our upbringing, or maybe something more innate than that. It may be hardwired into the brain, or perhaps the soul. It is a sense that the things that happen to us, and in the world in general, should work along some vague lines of fairness. We know that it doesn't always work this way, but we desire it nevertheless. It is our very innate desire for justice that makes us so outraged when we don't see it happen. Of course, one person's standard of justice is different from another's. There may be a good deal of overlap between people, and it is hoped that within any society there is a great deal of overlap, but the devil is always in the details. On some level, everybody's sense of justice is really their own, and there will always be some point where they alone consider this the way that things must be, while others beg to differ. We all have our own internal barometers on where we draw the line. But almost all of us agree on the principle of justice itself, that there has to be some standard that runs things. It isn't 100% clear why we feel so strongly about this, being as there is no such idea in nature. The animal and plant worlds have nothing resembling this, nor of course does the inanimate world. It is just us, human beings, who can think these sorts of things out, who demand this to be the case. We are so sure that we are right about this that it brooks no discussion. It is like a law of physics that simply cannot be broken. This sense appears to be there even in little children. From a very early age, perhaps 2 or even younger, kids have this indignant sense within them. Do they inherit this with their DNA? Do they learn it from their parents or somebody else? The simple indications are that it is just there, lodged in the brain or the mind, even though nobody really put it there. Where did it come from? This is a question that rarely gets asked for some reason. Perhaps questioning it is cutting things a bit too close for comfort. Justice seems to have been there from the earliest texts known. From the pre-biblical myths and hymns, we see this as one of the great themes. Certainly in every religious text, it figures prominently. There is no question that it is one of the main teachings of the Bible. It appears in one form or another in almost every chapter. The entire book of Job hinges upon it, and it is a major concept in many others. It is no surprise that it is found all over the place in the Torah section of the Bible. The Torah would seem empty without it. This week's Parsha is called Masei. That word means journeys, which happens to be the primary subject of the first third of the Parsha. There's a long list of the various stops the Israelites made as they went on their 40-year sojourn from the Exodus in Egypt through the Sinai wilderness until they made their way up the eastern spur of the Jordan River on the cusp of entering the Holy Land. Following this is a rough description of the borders of ancient Israel. While it is not easy to pinpoint every single location in either the list of the journeys or in the borders, many of them are known. This gives us a fairly good idea of where the Israelites went and where they settled. The basic map of ancient Israel was not all that different from the borders of modern Israel. The modern version has a good deal more land in the southern end, while the ancient version has much more in the northern end. Other than that, they are pretty similar. This is one of the most noteworthy features of the Bible and the situation today. This is probably the only case in the history of the world in which such an ancient homeland of a people was reclaimed by the modern descendants of that people. It is one of the real miracles of Judaism and one of the most uncanny events in world history. Following that is a brief list of the tribal leaders at the end of the 40-year period. After that comes a rather strange section dealing with the law of one who killed another accidentally. This section, which is surprisingly long, is introduced with the statement that cities of refuge must be established after crossing the Jordan and entering the land of Canaan. This, it turns out, was one of the first things the Israelites were commanded to do upon entering the land. Before setting up agriculture and even religious shrines, this had to be taken care of. Why this was so important is not made clear, but the details are spelled out at length. There were to be 6 of these cities, 3 east of the Jordan in areas that were settled there, and 3 west of the Jordan. These cities of refuge were only to house those who killed accidentally. Those who killed deliberately were to be executed by a court of justice. Several examples of deliberate killing are given in the text. In all of them, the execution is to be performed by someone called a quote, blood avenger. Presumably, this person was a relative of the victim who sought revenge for the murder. This was not looked upon as a barbaric form of vigilantism, but a kind of justice. If murder was committed, it only made biblical sense that those who were most deeply hurt by it should be able to exact revenge. If, however, the killing was accidental, the law changes. The blood avenger still has some right to get revenge, but the killer also has the means of avoiding it. This is where the cities of refuge come in. They were established as a refuge for the accidental killer, a place where the blood avenger was prohibited from taking revenge. The system of justice in this case was that the court would protect the accidental killer and serve as an escort to the city of refuge. The killer had to remain there or else run into the danger of being killed by the blood avenger. If the killer ever left, the protection of the city of refuge was gone, and the Wild West system of vigilantism kicked in again. There was, however, a time limit on how long the killer was allowed and obligated to stay in the city of refuge. This time limit, surprisingly, is not in months or years or decades. It is the vague and undetermined amount of time until the current high priest died. This could be the next day, or it could be 50 years later. This apparent arbitrary time is explicitly set in the Torah as the expiration date of the time spent in the city of refuge. The obvious question on this is why this particular event was chosen to determine how long the killer could and must remain in the city of refuge. It is not as if the high priest had anything to do with this accidental killing. He was just the highest religious authority in the land, so why should his death be a factor in when this killer leaves? There is no obvious answer to this question in the text, so it was left up to countless potential interpreters to come up with an answer. It is interesting that the text is unclear whether this requirement to remain in the city of refuge was considered to be a form of imprisonment or a kind of privilege. The Hebrew wording seems to support the privilege idea, being as the city of refuge seems to be exactly that, a refuge from the danger of being exposed to the blood avenger. There actually is no indication in the text that this was deemed imprisonment, even though this seems to be the way it was understood in Jewish tradition. With this in mind, perhaps we can make some headway on that question about the relationship between the death of the high priest and the end date of the killer's stay in the city of refuge. This was a privilege, but it was a privilege that came with an obligation. The privilege was only extended as long as the killer remained in the city of refuge. If that condition was violated, all bets and protection were off. But what does the death of the high priest have to do with extending that protection? Perhaps we have to incorporate a well-known and highly important biblical idea into the mix. The concept of atonement, kapara in Hebrew, is found all over the Bible. In fact, it is one of the most common concepts in the entire Torah. The name of what is commonly referred to as the holiest day of the Jewish year is Yom Kippur, which is derived directly from this word. It is, of course, the Day of Atonement. Atonement figures in one way or another in almost all the sacrificial offerings, and it plays a very prominent part in the entire system of biblical justice. There's little question that the death of an important religious figure like the high priest was considered a form of atonement for the entire nation. This is a well-known concept to this day in Judaism. In ancient times, when the entire notion of atonement was much more real to people, it would likely have been universally agreed upon. So, if this indeed was the case, the death of the high priest was a landmark moment in the life of the ancient Israelites. It was an event that provoked a sense of national atonement. Everybody, from the most righteous to the murderers, may have seen this as a time of divine forgiveness. Now we can get back to that question. This accidental killer, who was protected in the city of refuge, was not forgotten by whoever was the avenger of blood. These things don't go away overnight. That desire for revenge would remain there indefinitely. This is the way our innate sense of justice demands. However, there may have been certain things that could remove that burden from the avenger of blood's mind. There may have been something that would bring about a sense of divine justice, even if justice could no longer be brought about through human means. The death of the high priest, of all possible events, could be the cause of this minor miracle. Only something as drastic as that could serve as a substitute for the need for revenge and give rise to some sense of forgiveness. Justice is something that we all need in one form or another. While it is almost invariably seen as a good thing, there are times when it is rooted in the innate need for revenge. While this may also be justified, there are times when it must be curtailed. Sometimes things can come about in life that are subject to what may be a higher form of justice, the need to forgive. When such a moment comes about, it must be grasped like a treasure, for it may be the only thing that can bring about relief and closure. It is never easy to ask this of anybody who has truly been wronged, but sometimes it is necessary nevertheless. Shabbat Shalom.